Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Marla Payne-Thurman with the U.S. Autism Association, and I'm so excited today to be here with Dr. Laurence Becker and cinematographer Ron Zimmerman. And we're going to talk about a film that these two have worked on and kind of the underpinnings behind that film. But before we do that, I want to give each of you guys an opportunity to tell us a little bit about yourself. So thank you for being here. And Dr. Becker, I'd like you to start by telling us a little bit about your history and your story, because I know this project came from your work and your passion for kids with autism.
Thank you so much for finally getting together with Ron and me. I'm so happy that he's here because he was in on the first film back in the 1980, and we have been working and that was a synchronistic experience how I met him. I had seen a film called Where All Things Belong, and it was the most beautiful film I'd seen, and the filmmakers were in California. So I drove out to California and knocked on their door and said, "Would you help me make this film?" And they agreed. And before we could set up the trip over there, they moved to Colorado and divorced after 17 years. So I had no filmmaker. But Richard was in this country for an exhibition that I had in New York City for Gifted and Talented. And he and his father came over and brought 50 original pictures and then left them with me. But we were in Austin, and we got invited to be on That's Incredible, the film series about people who dive off platforms into 3 inches of water, so forth. And my daughter said, "Why are you on That's Incredible? Richard is above that." And I said, "Well, we'll have to raise the quality of the programming." Well, they hired a cinematographer from San Antonio, and that's how I met Ron. Synchronicity all over it. And he filmed in my house, Richard, for 2 days. And at the end of it, I asked him if he would be interested in shooting the film. And he said yes, and that's how our story began.
That's beautiful. Tell us the name of that film, Dr. Becker. I don't know if all of our viewers would know the name of that film.
With Eyes Wide Open, because the artist is legally blind. He works about 2 inches from the surface, and this is a picture of him working right up here. And
That's beautiful.
He uses the medium of oil crayon, which no other artist in history has used the medium like he has. This picture behind him is one of his originals, and the picture in the lower half here called Motoring Through the Australian Desert is one of his, and this one is one of his. He has several, and so we went over to film Richard in 1981, I believe, and we had the premiere of my film in 1983, and it was an amazing experience, and the film won 3 international awards and 4 national awards, been shown all over the world since 1983.
That's awesome. And this was, again, just for our audience, this was the first of 2 films, and we're going to talk about a brand new one that you guys have just worked on. So,
well, here's the new one, Fierce Love and Art. And we had the world premiere in 2018 here in Austin, But in 2019, we were in California at the Mozart and the Mind conference, and Temple Grandin was the keynote speaker. And Grant Manier, who is in my film from Houston, he's the ecological artist. He tears paper and uses other means to recycle, was introducing her. So Ron happened to be there, and we walked up to Temple after her presentation and said, "Would you be interested in narrating our film?" And
And she said yes.
And
Right.
so she'd never narrated a film before.
That's
This
awesome.
was her first film to narrate. And Ron flew to Colorado Springs to tape her, and we finally completed the documentary with her in 2021, and
That's
it's
wonderful.
available now. And we have a 10-minute trailer with her narrating and introducing the film on our website, which is fierceloveparents.com, because the parents are the ones who introduced their children
Absolutely.
to autism, to art, and enable them to learn to communicate and speak because of that.
Yeah, that's
So,
awesome. Well,
and we
thank
also
you.
have Dr. Daryl Treffert, who's the world's authority on savants and autism, making comments throughout the film. So we have two of the most important people in the whole field in the film. Very
That's awesome. Yeah, you really do. And by the way, the film is beautiful. And we'll talk about that a little more. I want to take a minute, Ron, and give you a chance to not only introduce yourself, but kind of tell us about how you got sucked into all this.
Well, Lawrence has told the story. I'm a filmmaker, and he had some good topics to do, some great people to meet, and some important messages to get out. And I thank him for letting me come along his journey.
Yeah, but you also had a kind of a personal interest in this, and you and I talked about that a little bit yesterday. Would you like to share kind of what your thoughts are about how this really inspired you, or why this particular project really inspired you? You certainly have no shortage of projects to work on.
Right, but folks who are autistic, you and I talked about how um, many times they're thought of as being retarded, and Lawrence and I have talked about that. That if you're around autistic people, you realize that they're incredibly intelligent. They may have some communication difficulties, but they certainly are sometimes very, very smart, smarter than myself or Lawrence or you perhaps at times. And I think that's what we're trying to look at as what can we learn from these people? And I think the way to do that is actually um, uh, talk to them closely, talk to the people around them, and listen to their stories. And I think that's what Lawrence and I have tried to do and be sensitive to. And so
Absolutely.
both our
Yeah.
films
Well,
have that kind of quality to it.
and it's interesting that you talk about Trafford, and I know he's no longer with us, but I've read a bunch of his research, and we think of this kind of savant syndrome as being a kind of rare occurrence. But the literature, if you follow Trafford's work, he's saying that at least 1 in 10 individuals with autism has some of these kind of savant abilities. And then it may be a lot more because we just don't assume that there's any potential, and very often we don't develop any of these interests or passions. One of the things that we're doing kind of with US Autism right now is moving into a theme again of these transitions. And really, I want to talk about how we can be developing strengths and passions in these individuals with autism, with the idea we're not just like padding padding an interest, that we might be really fueling what this person's life work is. And I think that story is best told by talking about the people in the film. So, Dr. Becker, can you talk to us about the people, the 9 individuals in the Fierce Love film?
Yes, I wanted to show you this. This is Dr. Treffert in his and he's holding one of the artists in our film, uh, Christophe Pio, who
Hmm.
was 13 when he did this. And Christophe cannot speak. He cannot um, feed himself. He cannot walk. Here's another one of his pictures.
Yeah,
And
they're
he can't
beautiful.
hold a brush. He paints with his hands with the color picture, color. This is a picture of him drawing down on his knees on the canvas using his hands. And this picture is one of my favorites of his on the left side. Um, it's three figures in magenta, and it's not for sale. It's in my art room. But,
Good for you. Keep a hold of that one. It is beautiful.
well, I hope one day you'll be able to come see visit the art room in person.
Oh, I would love to. I hope that's an invitation.
Well, it certainly is. And let's see, what was your
So
question?
let's talk about some of the other members of the film. So we had these 9 individuals, and I think you've said, we had an author and some musician, and so let's talk about.
But before we talk about all of them, we might talk about why we did the film and what we were looking for.
Absolutely, feel free. Let's do that.
We're looking for some common qualities. What is it that we can all learn from these folks who have these extraordinary abilities? I think that's why we did this film. Isn't that right, Laurence?
Well, to tell the story, I tell people I'm an aqueduct. I'm not the water. I'm not the source of the water. In fact, I said at one time I had no interest in working with the handicapped or the retarded. I wanted to work with the gifted. And then I met Richard Vavro, and it changed my life. So that's each of these persons is an incredible example of severe disability with autism who were brought forward by the fierce love and unrelenting search by the parents. That's why it's called Fierce Love and Art, using art to bring them back to make a positive contribution to the society, their world, and our world. Grant Manier is now in college in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, working at the Treffert Center. And he was severely autistic as a child, screamed unrelentingly, and tore paper. And the doctors told his mother to get him to stop tearing that paper. Well, she used it creatively, and he's an incredible artist now using paper. And his one of my favorite examples of his is the COVID dragon. And he uses the body of the dragon is made up of the contact lens holders of his mother's. So he is not ashamed of using all sorts of creativity. And someone gave him a lot of antique jewelry. And he made this and gave it to my wife. It's a piece of clay that has these stuck on it. So he is not ashamed of using, and he's in Dr. Rosa Garcia's new book on the COVID canvas. There are 12 artists in this book, and 2 of them are in my film, Grant Manier and Ping Lian. And she has strokes of genius as a, and they just put out their 2012 calendar, which is a picture of Grant Ping Lian on the front. Um, it's New York City. So we're involved in a lot of different people.
Let's run down the list of the people that are in the film. Lawrence, you
Okay.
want to talk about each one of them? We start with Tony DeBlois, don't we? Talk about him.
Well, we can start with him. There's 7 artists, the most prodigious savant musician in the world, and a minister author in the world. So the 9 people in the film and their parents. And Tony is the savant musician. He was born weighing 1 pound and 3/4 of an ounce. His mother said she could hold him in her hand like a hamster. That is just, and the doctor said, "Shall we try and save him?" And she said, "You don't reject gifts from God. I've had 9 failed pregnancies. Let's save this one." So they gave him too much oxygen and he's totally blind. But he has self-taught himself 23 musical instruments, sings with perfect pitch in 11 languages, and graduated magna cum laude from the Berklee College of Music in Boston, which is like Juilliard.
And has autism.
Yeah, and he can't read or write. So they asked his mother, "How are we going to grade him?" And she said, "It's very simple. You ask him a question, he can demonstrate the answer on the piano." And that's how he graduated magna cum laude in a very prestigious university.
Well, and you have to give them credit for being able to bend a little, because I think, I've worked with a number of these really bright kids who don't speak. And so often these colleges and universities are saying, well, if they don't speak and they don't write, then how are we going to get them through? And I think it is tricky, but I think there's ways to understand that there's a lot of intelligence in there, and these kids really do know the information. We just have to find alternative ways to help them express it, and I think that's not happening as much as it should be, but I'm glad that they did that for him.
Tony is quite amazing. He can play probably somewhere over 20,000 songs, all from memory. And I
Right.
tested him out to see if I played him a song, how many times did I have to play it until he picked it up? Well, he can pick it up the very first time.
Yeah.
It may take a second time to get all the lyrics down on the song, but he's one of the most amazing musicians you'll ever see, and has never read music. It all comes from internalizing it. Now, how does he do that? There's got to be something that all musicians can learn from Tony DeBlois.
Well, and Ron, that's an important point, because
learn.
Yeah, it's not that this is, and by the way, I would like to kind of clarify for just a minute. When we see these things in autism, by the way, Trafford talked about this, if it's in autism and it's this really, it's a true gift, we call it a savant skill. But if a normal person did it, we would call it a gift. And it's almost like we have this different language between talking about these talents and abilities in individuals with autism and talking about them in other populations. And what we find is that sometimes in autism, the gift is so much more developed. Like you say, they're tapping into a part of their cognitive ability that the rest of us have never figured out how to do. And I think that's a really important point. So, yeah. So, talk to me about some of the other artists then.
Well,
Kim Dixon was the second one in the film after Tony. You want to talk about Kim? She's a poet.
Well, Kimberly Dixon was born totally normal, and she developed autism and epilepsy. Her mother taught her to use a typewriter and then a computer. They saw a film on television about how people learn to speak or learn to think and communicate with computers. And they looked at each other, she and her husband, and said, "This is what we are going to do with Kimberly." she became an artist. She met Richard Vavro at an exhibition here in Austin when she was 8 years old. And she talks about later on the computer, she decided to become an artist at that point.
So he inspired her then. That's
Yes,
awesome.
we have a picture of my holding her next to Richard drawing 2 inches away from the surface. And his father is sitting there next to him. And that's when she decided to become an artist. So she published a book called Beneath. Anyway,
Not bring, it'll come to you the minute you stop talking about it.
she wrote a book about what it is, and has her poems. She wrote over 100 poems, and we read some of them in the film, and became an artist. And she has an artwork and her poetry in the book. Um,
As her father tells us in the film, these are not poems about roses are red and violets are blue. She's talking about her innermost feelings. She's talking about what it feels like to have a seizure. And she had sometimes hundreds of seizures in a day, and each one of
Yeah.
them was devastating to her brain. And she talks about that feeling, the bright lights, and all the feelings, just like any other poet would do. They're quite moving. Her poetry. I think it's Under the Silence Is Me.
yes,
Is the name of her book.
Under the Silence Is Me, what it means to be nonverbal. And it's an incredible book. I have it on my list of books and films on art, on autism and education, which I share with
Well,
you.
obviously not nonverbal, and that's a good point. She's maybe non-vocal, but she's certainly very verbal.
That's right. That's right. And her last film, her last poem was written after she had attended a butterfly release nearby in Wimberley. And this butterfly came and landed on her. It was released. There were 1,500 released, I believe, and it landed on her knee and stayed the rest of the time there. And so she wrote a poem called "The Butterfly," and
Wow.
that was the last poem she ever wrote.
And the significance of the poem is that um, that great beauty comes from, a creature, a caterpillar that has to change. You have to change.
Right, that metamorphosis, yeah.
So it's quite moving that that's her last poem of all time.
Yeah, and thinking about it, imagine.
And fell down and hit her head and was taken
Yeah.
to the hospital and died.
In front of her father in their house, she fell and hit her head and never recovered from that. She often wore a helmet, but she didn't have it on.
That day. Yeah. Well, and imagine being of this intelligence and kind of trapped in a body that doesn't do what you want it to do, right? And I think so many times we've heard, once these individuals who have this more severe form of autism, they are able to get some words and get that out to us. They're saying, "Hey, I'm in here. I have plenty of intelligence. I just can't make my mouth work. I can't make my hands work. I can't control the sensory movements of my body. And so please don't assume that I'm not here." And I think so often we kind of take this assumption that if a person can't speak, that they must not be smart. And I think that's really, really sad because so many times we're missing that trapped individual.
Yes.
You're absolutely right. But it's also interesting to see that all of these folks have a reason to express themselves and they find a medium to do that. Tony did it in music. Kim Dixon did it in her poetry. We had a fellow who is nonverbal, and he did it through using a bandsaw to create portraits in wood. Eric
Right.
is his name, and he lives in Hayes, Kansas.
Now, what was his name? Ron?
Eric Warren is
Eric. Okay, let's talk a little bit about Eric's work.
Well, we went to film him, and his father gave up watching sports when he was very young and devoted his time to mentoring Eric. And Jim Warren passed away before the film was completed, but he's in the film. And we show Eric at work in a bandsaw. He used a bandsaw to create
a scroll saw, really,
scroll
isn't it?
saw.
Yeah,
Well, it's a band,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
but and Eric, uh, Jim, and his wife had another child who had learning difficulties, so they divorced, and she took the other child, and Jim took Eric and devoted his life to her, to him. And Eric went to live with another family who has several other children and was a part of that family really later on. But it was quite moving to see this kind of art, and he didn't cut his hands with it.
I know, it's kind of a miracle. I mean, and by the way, it just shows that that skill was really developed. And by the way, his work, I've seen some of his work, and it blows your mind. I mean, it's not something that, I'm not sure the rest of us could have figured it out without cutting our fingers off. You know what I mean? It's pretty remarkable, the work, and it's very beautiful work.
You don't see a whole lot of people, a lot of artists doing scroll work, scroll saw work, and
Mhm.
yet he's done tens of thousands of portraits and pieces. It's quite amazing.
Yeah, and they're all very lovely. And by the way, and again, not within the realm of, oh, autistic person does art. We're talking about in the real world of, professional artists. These guys all stand out in that world.
Right. Were you going to bring up Seth Quast? Is that the next one you
Yeah.
want to talk about?
This is a person who, Seth Quast, who didn't take art until he was in his 20s. He had a professional, and this is called Manhattan floating. It's the picture of Manhattan, and there are 104 separate canvases in this,
Mm.
and it's 11 feet tall and 24 feet wide. And how I discovered him, I was looking for a book on my bookshelf, and his book, The Unexpected Life, fell off the shelf.
Talk about synchronicity.
And I had not read it. And I looked at it and I said, he's got to be in the film. So we went to film him. And
His mother is a social worker, but she gave up her practice to devote her life to her son. And as Laurence said, it wasn't until he was in his 20s, after trying all kinds of other things, that his painting skills came forth. And his mother, Deborah Quast, had the foresight to hire tutors to tutor Seth, and he's done just so many different genres of painting, and he's had art shows all over. They spend about half the year in Europe, and so he has art in galleries in Paris and in galleries in Italy, and he's just an amazing fella, and he's got still so much more to go. He's been doing great art and selling it at pretty high prices, but the best is yet to come, as Deborah and Seth will tell you. Although he's pretty much nonverbal, isn't he, Laurence? And
well,
and he speaks through his art.
yes,
Yeah.
but I think it's important to note that he had official diagnosis by handicap organization, and their conclusion after their diagnosis was that he would best be served by being a dry mop user,
Janitor.
janitor. The
Yeah,
rest,
barely even the janitor, just the guy who follows the janitor.
yeah. And they said it's a very worthwhile occupation. And his mother said, "Over my dead body." And she enrolled him in, they lived in Cleveland Heights, Ohio. And he has exhibitions at the Cleveland Clinic. But she enrolled him in dancing school and art class. He'd never done any art until he was 20, and he's a world famous artist.
Yeah, I know, and it's really interesting. Stephen Shore is on our advisory board. I'm sure you've heard of him, and he tells the story of his. He was told, his parents were told that he should just be institutionalized, and his mom did that same thing over my dead body, and now he's probably one of the top most famous people, travels all over the world. We have kind of a running joke, where in the world is Stephen Shore? Because he's literally probably the most well-traveled autistic person on the planet, and very, has published a number of books and speaks internationally and teaches at Adelphi University. And this was a family that was told, you might as well just put him in an institution now. He's not going to be able to do anything at all. And so many times these parents, especially when these kids are young, are kind of encouraged to give up now. And I think that's probably a really big theme of what your film is kind of trying to relay, is that don't give up. And some of these people didn't develop these skills until they're in their 20s. And I think that's really an important message that comes out of the film.
Well, Richard Vavro was told, his parents were told when he was 5 to put him in an institution and forget him. And
Yeah.
they found later that the doctor had done that with his son.
Yeah.
That recommended that. So it's amazing.
There's another artist that we did, and you don't think of really writers necessarily, perhaps poets as being artists, but Ron Sanderson had difficulties as a child. His mother was an artist, and so she created sort of word books. He would tell her stories. That was his skill, was telling stories.
Mm-hmm.
So he would she would draw his stories out, and then and he would embellish them. And
right.
that became their teaching method. She homeschooled him, and that became his math, his science, his history, everything through his own stories. And she said he probably wouldn't have paid any attention to other things other than what he was coming up with himself. But he's written and published 3 books. Is that right?
3 books, and one of the chapters in the latest book features Kimberly Dixon,
Mm-hmm.
the butterfly, and
right.
film is talked about in that. And she's on the cover. A picture of her is on the cover of that book. But Ron was told, his parents were told he'd never finish high school, and he has his theological degree from Oral Roberts University.
And he's married and has a child.
Yes.
And works full-time in a hospital.
Huh.
He's doing exhibitions all over for the hospital, and they have 300 employees, and he's showing the film, our film, and talking about his books to all the people in the hospital. So
yeah, Ron, you brought up a good point, I think, and this is so true. So many times our school systems don't have the capacity, and these parents have to really take on kind of a huge challenge of figuring out alternative ways to teach these kids. And when we really understand some of these kids, we understand their thinking is so different. They don't have a really great fit in our educational systems. And I think that's something that we as a society need to do a lot better with, because short of just, giving up and quitting your job, which a lot of families can't do, and homeschooling your child, some of these kids were missing these little windows in, these little opportunities in. And I think that by just plugging away, we're kind of missing the boat. I had a little guy I was working with last week, kind of just to give an example of how different the mind is. Asked him, the question was, what are the things that you're afraid of? And he said, broccoli and cauliflower. And I said, broccoli and cauliflower? Why are you afraid of them? And he said, Miss Marlowe, they are just small bushes, so you don't know what could be hiding in them. But thinking about that, I mean, it was just, and by the way, we hear these little statements when we work with this population, we hear these little statements all the time. That's just like, wow, that's a completely different mind to look at. And by the way, it's very true. There, he's like, well, it could be in his mind, it was small birds and bunnies, really tiny bunnies, and all kinds of bugs. He did add that there was all manner of bugs, and so he's terrified of eating them, right? But it's just so interesting how I've lived a whole life and never thought about broccoli and cauliflower that way. And I think that's so often what we find when we work in autism is this really different mindedness that opens up something brand new that we ourselves would have never even considered.
That's the path of an artist, to show people
Right.
the way of seeing things. And I think Laurence and I have both been inspired by the folks that we've come in contact with, because they have shown us new ways of seeing the world.
Right.
That's
Right.
really
Yep.
one of the messages in our film, is that if you're open to it, you can get that kind of inspiration from really anyone. Daryl Trefford actually went to kind of the core of what some of the things you're talking about, and that's that all of these folks need an advocate, and it can be a mother or a father or both parents, but it can be an aunt or a grandparent or a brother or sister. They
Mm-hmm.
all need advocates to get them through the tough times and to help them find uh, their means and their medium, whatever it is. They need to find their art to be able to express themselves. But somehow it's inside of every human being to try to express themselves, and we need to be open to that.
And not only to try to express themselves, but I think what you guys are saying is that the entire autism spectrum, regardless of how high or low functioning, has something to give, has something to share, has something they want to contribute. We just have to find that way, find that medium, I think, as you said. So thank you for sharing that.
Well, and I have to mention this book, Sunrise by Barry Kaufman. This
Mm-hmm.
is the first time I ever heard the word autism. I had
Right.
never heard the word before. And a little girl in a tiny fishing village in rural Maine, 200 miles north and east of Portland, gave that to my daughter to give to me. And that was 1 month before I went over to meet Richard for the first time
In
in
Scotland.
in Scotland. Uh, and he had been introduced to me by the chairman of the um, psychiatric hospital in Edinburgh, as he had worked with Richard for 7 years, and he was introduced as having a 30 IQ in the mind of a 6-year-old.
Yeah.
I read this book. I'd never heard of the word autism 1 month before I went over to Scotland. And after 5 minutes of meeting Richard, I discovered that diagnosis by the chairman of the psychiatric department was totally wrong. Richard was not mentally retarded. He was very, very bright. And I knew brightness, having worked with the gifted and written several books about gifted education. And again, synchronicity, why that little girl gave that book. And the Sunrise, Ron Kaufman.
Yeah. And I know Ron really well. He's on our advisory board and a really good friend of the US Autism Association.
And he has a PhD.
Yeah,
Like,
PhD in well, no, actually, I'm not. He may have a master's. I'm trying to
no,
think.
he
I don't know
has
if he
a
has a PhD, but
PhD.
he travels all over the world and speaks publicly. And yeah,
Yeah, Stephen Shore. I wrote a series for a whole year with Stephen Shore was one of there were 14 authors, and mine was books and films that you may not know about. and he wrote an article. It was for um, anyway, it was publication. Each month we wrote a different article, 14 of us.
Yeah.
And that was,
And by the way, that's a picture of Ron as a child on the book.
oh
that's
yeah,
his that's
that's
his
right.
baby picture. So yeah,
And I
that's
want to mention this book by
yeah.
Lanier. It has Temple Grandin. Um, here's her picture. Um, and the zookeeper is Mr. Becker. So
Oh wow.
I'm famous. And in the back, it has um, Grant is introducing Temple to all the animals in the zoo who have various forms of autism.
Yeah.
And it's the fifth in the series of books written by Grant, or illustrated by Grant and written by his mother. And it's printed in dyslexia font, which I had no idea of that it existed, but that's how it's, so it enables people with dyslexia to read the book.
Yeah.
And
I have a dyslexic son, so I'm really familiar with
yeah,
dyslexia actually. But
well,
yeah.
I'd never heard of that either. So my learning continues through this project and sharing it with. I had my teeth cleaned today and learned that the person working on my teeth has two members of his family that have autism. So I introduced my work to him. So it was not for naught.
Yeah. One of the things that I think we're starting to, try to figure out is why the autism rates are climbing as much as they are. In other words, and this is in my career, I remember when I went to college, this is going to really age me. Autism was a 1 in 5 or 6,000 occurrence kind of condition. And I think we're doing a better job of identifying it, but I think we're also seeing a lot more of it. And if you think about a classroom now, where I was in classrooms 25 years ago, there might have been 1 or 2 kids in the whole school who diagnosed or otherwise looked a little Asperger's-y or autism-y, right? Now it's almost like there's 1 or 2 kids in every class. So we're really seeing that. And I think it's important that we're talking about these things, because not only are we seeing this increase, but as we're seeing this increase, we're trying to understand what to do about it. And it's becoming this kind of huge social situation. And that's why I think your film is so important, because it gives some other alternatives to families who have these really otherwise very impaired kids, to have hope and to see that there's kind of ways out of this. And I think it can be very overwhelming as a parent. And these parents, let's talk about the parents for just a minute, because I think these are we're talking about the kids, but these are the unsung heroes of this film.
Well, we sing we sing their song too. So,
and I think in the individuals you're talking with and interviewed, there was probably an injury component for all of them, and it might have not been the same thing.
yeah.
There's so much yet to learn about what's causal and what's coincidental in these things.
Exactly.
We
Yeah.
need the research done, but nevertheless, as you said, because the incidence of autism is getting to be greater and greater, we have to have sort of a path out of it for parents. And I think art is one of those ways. Is
Yeah,
just
art. And by the way, when you say art, you're really talking about art, music, any kind of one of these creative mediums is a way to kind of break in and break out. And we have, it's interesting. I have a couple of kids that we've worked with who are athletically talented, believe it or not. In other words, they figured out how to overcome the motor side, and they have, the black belts in the martial arts, or they have, the rock climbing capability, because they have the ability to kind of apply all of their intelligence to that really technical skill, even though in other areas they might not function well at all. So there's lots of ways to have an outlet.
Well, that's very intelligent of you to realize that there are multiple intelligences
right?
And of course, there's a book on the theories of multiple
Right.
intelligence.
Howard Gardner told us there's multiple intelligence, but I think what you guys in this film are doing is saying that there's a lot more multiple intelligences than maybe we even considered.
Right.
And by the way, up to the point that it brings the question, what is intelligence, right? Like we've always assumed in our, the way we assess and evaluate for intelligence, you have to be able to speak and you have to be able to produce and with your hands, and you have to be able to kind of store and organize and sequence in this kind of really traditional way. But I think it's really important to recognize through your work, you're really saying there's other things to intelligence. And it's like, what is the heart of intelligence? I think that was something that came out of the film. And I can't remember if that was exact wording, but there is another component that we're really overlooking as a whole society and what intelligence actually is or what it could be.
It's curious. I think Dr. Treffer touched on this, that instead of just talking about the mental construct of folks with autism being disabled, perhaps they're evolving faster than the rest of us. That's not just a guess, that there are more connections in the brain in autistic.
Different connections for sure, and that they're more dense.
Is that a way of humans actually evolving to some future human species in the future? And it's not just science fiction. I mean, it's happening in front of our eyes, I think, and we can see it in some of the folks that we profiled in our film.
Well, and it's interesting you bring that up because one of the speakers that we're kind of working with right now has done a lot of the kind of epidemiology research in terms of what is actually happening in terms of genetic evolution in individuals with autism. And we may be actually, like you say, genetically evolving an entirely different realm of cognitive human than, and by the way, I like the term allistic. It means I don't have autism versus the, neurodiversity, which should incorporate us all. But when we look at individuals with autism, that there are some very different cognitive, even on SPECT imaging, we see different pieces of the brain really, really lighting up in ways that isn't true for the rest of us. And that may not be a deficit. In other words, we weren't all created to be the same. We weren't all created to be quote unquote in this little normal bucket. And I think your film does a beautiful job of really kind of expanding into that discussion for people. So yeah.
Who is the person that you were referring to?
In terms of which one?
You talked about expanding the definition of intelligence.
Well, there's Dr. Crespi out of, and I can't remember, Bernard Crespi has done a lot of this research. And then we have somebody that's in our organization, Dick Williams. He's also an epidemiologist, and they've kind of discussed and worked through it. So we're going to actually, I'm looking forward because I have that interview coming up, and I think that'll be really interesting. And by the way, I'd like to remind us all that, you go back to Kanner and Asperger, the two original founders, they both talked about this super high intelligence. Like these were the moms who were not staying home. They were working. Kanner, talked about the all of these children come from prodigious lines of intelligence. That was a quote right out of Kanner's notes. Asperger actually IQ tested all his, and he had 117 cases or whatever, and he IQ tested all of his and had the mean IQ at 120 when he was able to kind of get in there and actually look at that. And for a long time, we thought those two populations were very different, right? That's why we had the two different terms, Asperger and autism. But when we started, Silberman's book came out and really discovered that they shared the same research associate and that we were talking about the same type of kid all along, that there weren't these two really different populations. But we kind of walked away from that topic of intelligence, partly because Bettelheim came along and criticized the working moms for causing the autism, right? So anyway, it's kind of an interesting position because this is the first time in probably, 60 years that anybody's really talking about the latent or hidden intelligence in autism. And I think it's an important topic.
I think that's brilliant. That's a brilliant analysis. And I'm glad you've mentioned all that as a background for folks who haven't, like myself, or who are not up to speed on the current research. But thank you for that. It's actually
Yeah.
the history of the field, also, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think your film is so it's a lot more than just saying, okay, here's some disabled people who have risen above their disability to become talented in this one kind of area. It's acknowledging that underneath of all of this disabling condition that we call autism, especially in what might be a more injured variant of autism, that we're actually getting finally to some maybe deep intellectual ability that is hidden. And if you think about that, that's kind of a crime that we're missing it in so many individuals. It's kind of like reminds me of the days when we thought individuals with cerebral palsy were all intellectually disabled, right? Until we got some of them could communicate and we realized they had potentially average and sometimes gifted IQs underneath of this very physical condition. And I think it's time in autism that we start really considering autism in that same lens, that there is potentially very high intelligence. And by the way, the literature still says 60% of individuals with autism have intellectual disabilities, and they don't test real well on an IQ test. So that proves it, right? Well, what you're saying is that this, in spite of I don't care how they test on an IQ test, look at the brilliance that we're seeing through this work.
Well, one of the things that is interesting is the Special Olympics. Here are people who are physically disabled who are doing things on the ski slopes, who are doing things in every area, sprinting with artificial legs. I mean, it's just incredible what
Yeah.
people have done. And that's been a fairly recent development in the Olympics.
Yeah, and I think there's one more topic I'd like to throw at us before we kind of close. We're really talking about resilience, right? I mean, talk about the strength of the human spirit and the resilience of all of these individuals in this film and their parents to kind of wade through all of these things that were given to them and come out ahead of them. And I think maybe you guys could share your thoughts on resilience.
Well, I think we found some people who are very fortunate to have the parents that they did and were able to come into their own, if you will, and to reward all of us with their visual art and their musical art and their word art, their verbal art. But think of the hundreds and thousands of other children who grow up to be adults who don't have whatever that missing piece is really in the society around them to
Right.
help them to also find a way to express themselves.
Exactly. In other words, you can only be as resilient as your circumstances allow. Yeah, that's a really good point.
Precisely, but we should all be more sort of cognizant of that and
Yeah, aware and trying to figure out how to fuel that and feed that. Yeah.
precisely. Maybe that's something that we can all sort of resolve to do more in the future is
Hmm.
to find ways that children who, like the ones that are in our film, who have become adults, how all children can't find something that allows them to be um, more creative and more
Right.
self-expressive.
And there was definitely something in these families that was unique to supporting them and helping them continue and not give up and keep trying and keep putting forth. Because, by the way, there's no such thing as an artist that was born, right? Every artist took 100,000 hours to become an artist, and every one of these artists has taken 100,000 hours to become an artist too. And so that support, that emotional support that kept them going when they had pieces that were discouraging, right?
Well, we talked about that a lot of times people with autism have no guile. They really are authentic to their true selves. And that's, I
Hmm.
think, what makes a lot of this art, of whatever kind of art it is, so exciting is that it's really coming straight from the heart from these folks. You know,
Yeah.
it really is a reflection of their selves, and you don't you see a lot of people, particularly artists, sort of putting on other neurotypical perhaps artists. You know, they try one thing and try another because they're trying to market themselves in different kinds of ways.
Right.
But I think the artists that Laurence identified here and who we spent time with, they really are not marketing themselves. They're not out to sell
No,
themselves.
they're selling beautiful
True
works of art.
authenticity. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And by the way, I think Fierce Love says it all, but talk to me your thoughts, Dr. Becker, about resilience and kind of that perseverance and that kind of human spirit in that's behind all of this.
Well, I've just so enjoyed getting to know these various parents and their stories and being able to share their stories. And that's what's so important about Strokes of Genius, um, is that she is um, ultimately sharing the stories and the perseverance, even in the midst of a COVID
Yeah.
crisis. What did these artists do? They persevered and continued their art. And there are 80 pictures, color pictures in this book of the artist's work from around the world. And some of them are very different, but all of them are seeking to continue to work creatively in the midst of a cultural and worldwide crisis. And that so many people have given up who aren't
Mhm.
autistic and just quit their jobs and covered. And these people are still working.
Funny, Temple recorded a session for us at the beginning, about, I don't know, a few months into COVID. And it was, she titled it, Get Off the Couch and Do Something. And I love that.
Well,
It's so Temple, right? But
Ron sent
actually, I
me
saw this article. Yep.
article, and I said, "Has Temple really dyed her hair?"
No, I assure you, she has not dyed her hair.
Well, good. I was
Yep.
questioning her, but that
Didn't look, yeah, kind of a vogue perspective of Temple. So let's you got I appreciate so much. And I'd like to kind of close with just kind of your closing thoughts. If you kind of had, one or two things that you'd really like the viewers of this session to really take out of this and out of the film and out of the work that you've done, what is it that you would like to close on? And Dr. Becker, I'll start with you. Or do you want me to start with Ron? I'll start with Ron, and then we'll let Dr. Becker go last. So Ron, go ahead if you feel like you have that ready.
Just quote Daryl Treffert, and he's told us, in the last few years of his life when we interviewed him, that after all this time of studying folks and he's been studying the mind as a psychiatrist and as an MD all this time, that he comes back to the human heart, that it's not just about the human mind, it's letting back to the human heart and what's inside the human heart. And those are really powerful words to me.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. Thanks for sharing that, Ron. And Dr. Becker, how would you like to wrap this up today?
Well, I appreciate so much your inviting us to be here and Ron to be here. I don't get to see him that much. He's working too hard, but I'm working to get this film as widely um, seen as possible, to share these stories with everyone. And I shared it with my dental assistant today. So, these opportunities are always present. And that he asked me if I was retired, and I said, no, I'm refired. And he said, what does that mean? And I said, being creative throughout your life, each and every day, and not um, sitting on the back burner or sitting watching television. The thing about television, there's so many commercials. I'm so happy I have a mute button because they're either about automobile accidents or drugs that are buying new furniture. I mean, this is all of it's on the commercials, and there's more to life than that.
As Temple said, get off the couch, right?
Yeah,
Right,
get off the couch and do something.
right.
And do something.
So
Yeah.
that thank you again for this opportunity.
Thank you all for being with us today. And Ron Zimmerman, thank you for your contributions, not only to this film, but to all of the hundreds of documentaries that you've done to make the world a better place. And Dr. Becker, I just want to thank you for your life work in the field of autism. And on behalf of kind of the autism community, we're so pleased to have you with us today and to be able to share this beautiful work of yours and your life and your vision in terms of making these films possible. So thank you so much. I am really just so honored to be with you today. So appreciate all your time. And I'm going to go ahead and wrap us up here. And thank you to our audience who is joining us.